Looks good. Alright, we're live. Welcome back to the lab. Trying a new setup today. I've got an Android phone using the IP webcam app. I'm hoping this seems to give a lot, much better image quality than it did before. We have, for example, autofocus. Oh, revolutionary. Oh, come on. Camera. I swear we have autofocus. Of course it decides to mess up now. So anyway, I'm testing this out right now. Because it's on Wi-Fi, there's a lot of latency. Observe. It's bad. Apparently there's a way I can use my old Android phone as a USB webcam. So I'm going to try that tomorrow. But for now, I've already put this job off for one other day. I want to get back into it. So this is what we're going to stick with and just try out this quality. We're back on the Dreamcast. I'm going to continue from where I left off last time. We're going to go with the IDE mod today. Because it's now got its piggybacked BIOS up and running the way I was hoping. So it's time to see if that BIOS chip can actually boot off something other than the Dreamcast disk drive. So I've already kind of gone ahead and mocked up the way I want to have this wired. Don't know if you can see in there. That's a compact flash card and card reader that are hooked up through IDE. They're sitting there on kind of this angle right now. I think that's the way I'm going to go for it. The lid can close over top of it. It opens, it's available, it's got a little ejector push button that you hit and it'll pop the card out. Now when you shove the card in, it's just enough to clear underneath the lid. And it floats above the motherboard in there, which I'm kind of fond of. So I think that's a good way to do it without having to permanently slash holes in the case of this thing. I want to keep this reversible, remember. It's not mounted in there permanently at all. When I do have this all said and done, if I get this tested and working, I'm actually going to build a metal enclosure around this. So you should just see some flat black metal here with the card reader popping out of it. And it'll look quite professional, I think, once it's done. It's going to take some work, though, and I want to make sure that this card reader works first also, just in case I've got the wrong model somehow and I need to use a different brand if this one's not compatible in some way. I don't want to go building all kinds of fixtures for it and then find out I've got to start over because I need to use a card reader that's a totally different size. So that's the plan. I'm going to pull this apart. This is just sitting in here loose right now. We're going to pull it apart, see where the ribbon cable is laying right now, and then go over what actually needs to be done today. So here is my IDE compact flash card reader. So I've just got a 32 gig compact flash card to use in it right now. This is the only device I have that will use compact flash. But apparently compact flash actually also uses the IDE bus. So that's a dead simple device. It basically just needs to tell the bus whether or not it's a master or a slave drive, and that's it. All the other pins are a one-to-one match. So here's the way I've got the IDE cable laying right now. This is the back of the Dreamcast here. The cable is going underneath the board because the connectors that I actually have to solder it to are right underneath where this white plug is, because that's where your GD-ROM actually plugs in. That's the connector for it. So on the bottom side of the board there's a bunch of through-hole pins, and that's where these are going to get soldered to. So this sticking at the front, this is all extra and this is going to be trimmed back. I'm going to pull it out of here because I was planning my spacing. So if I flip it over, let's get this on camera. These here are the pins that we're looking for. This little row here, there's 4 rows actually that come right up to the edge of the board. Those little circle pads are what we need. Unfortunately, it's not nicely lined up, 1, 2, 3, 4 to number up with the cable, the IDE cable that I'm using. They're kind of all over the place. So my initial hope was I wanted to keep this really nice and tidy. I was going to have my IDE cable lay flat on the bottom of the board here, and then maybe do like a 90-degree bend so that it could come up to the edge of the board where those connectors are under here, and then I could solder nicely. It doesn't look like that's really going to work. So the plan now is I'm going to separate all the cables, strip them back to about halfway up the board here, and then from there I'll have individual wires that can come over to the points and run. And I'm going to try and do this tactically so that I don't have too many wires overlaying each other, because that's going to make a really tall stack of wires and it might not fit under the board when I'm all done. So I really want to avoid that. I did another thing ahead of time, which is there's a RF shield. This metal plate sits in the bottom of the Dreamcast case. There we go. A lot of people just, when they do this mod, they throw this thing out. It's really thin, flimsy metal. It's an RF shield. As I understand that, it's for regulations to make sure that some devices aren't emitting harmful radio waves or anything that's going to mess with your other electronics. I don't think these have the effect of stopping incoming signals, or that's not what they're meant to do. It's only for emitting them. So a lot of people say, I don't care if my Dreamcast messes up my VCR, I'm just going to get rid of this thing. The reason I'm keeping it is because you see these two gray patches here. These are the same things we saw on top of the board on the CPU, the actual processor chips. They're another type of thermal compound. The board is actually sort of, this plate is punched down on those two places, and they have thermal compound on top of them. So those two things touch tiny little chips on the bottom of the board. So this is being used as a rudimentary heat sink. So I don't want to take that away. I'm going to assume they were put there for a reason. I don't want to risk having something overheat and slowly kill the system. So instead, I ground off. The back of this board used to have, just like over here, you can see this is bent up and it's tall on the back edge of this. This was the same thing all the way over here. I just took an angle grinder to the back of that, made it flat. So now my ribbon cable can lay flat against here, come out behind the motherboard, and then flip over the top. So that part is already done. Make sure to file your edges when you do that. You don't want to make a nice little knife that's going to lay against your ribbon cable and slowly saw into it over months or years. Just take the time and make the edge nice, and you won't have an issue in the future. So the job now is going to be boring. I have to take my ribbon cable, and I'll mark off where I need to get to, and I've got to take each one of these wires really delicately, separate them from the bundle all the way back so I have an individual wire for each one starting from here, and then I've got to find some way to actually strip the ends of the wires to get this shielding off. To do that, I've got a new tool, or an old one that I haven't used before on here. So these are called thermo tweeze. They're thermal tweezers. Each side of this has a soldering iron. They both heat up. These are designed to remove chips from circuit boards. They sell all kinds of different tips that you put on here that fit exactly around different chips that have lots of legs on them. And so the idea is you get two, usually sort of like a flat wide blade on each side, and you can come alongside some of, say, these longer chips. You would come down with two big flat blades, heat up all the pins at once, squeeze them together, and you just lift the board, or the chip, right off the board. That's really meant for more of a commercial setting. If you have to take off one chip, there's no point buying a tool like this for that. You just go slow with the soldering iron, lift your legs with a scalpel, and slowly get there. But I'm going to cheat because I have these. I already tested this on two wires. I can actually pinch the wire between these two prongs, and it melts the shielding that's on them, the insulation. Then I can strip it off, and then that gets rid of most of it, and then I'll just come back with my normal tweezers and kind of strip off the rest of it. And that should make pretty short work of 44 wires, because otherwise that's going to take a long time. Now I do have to be very careful, because hopefully I can show this off. This wire here, I pulled a little too quickly, and it actually pulled the wire right out of the insulation and stripped it all the way up here. This wire I can't use anymore because it's bare, there's no insulation on it, and it's come all the way back here. So when I get to these wires and I need to separate them more, I'm going to be real careful that I don't botch this one anymore. I've got plenty of extra right now, but the closer I get to my final length, the less I have to work with. And the one final concern I've got here, I still don't know an answer to this. I believe these IDE cables are flat ribbons for a reason, and the reason is you want to keep all these wires the same length, because if you don't, I think the hard drives were very sensitive to the timing of how quick the signals would actually flow down the wire. So if you had some wires were shorter than others, the signals would get there too early, for example, and the data would be unreadable. I don't know all the science behind it. I don't know if that's with this or SCSI or different technologies. I kind of remember hearing something about that. So in order to keep things neat and tidy, I'm not going to try and keep all of my wires in here the same length. I'm going to kind of go shortest path from where the wire ends up to where it needs to be soldered, and then I'm going to trim off the extra. If it doesn't work and everything else looks okay, I'm going to have to assume that this does need roughly equal length connectors, and then at that point I'll have to chop this all out and get a new ribbon cable and do it the hard way. But I'm going to cross my fingers and we'll see if this works the way I'm intending it to right now. So I found a Twitch library that's got, it's right from Twitch actually, and it supposedly has a bunch of royalty-free music, so I won't keep my mic muted this time. You'll hear some music on in the background. It's not really my thing, but it's enough to keep me from going crazy. And as always, if there's any questions, people should feel free to ask. I'll be happy to answer them. If not, I'm just going to get started doing lots of annoying fiddly work, and I'll let you know if I learn anything new. I've been having some trouble with this light here. It just flickered off on me again. I've got two lights up here. One is just a fluorescent tube light, and the other is a normal compact fluorescent in a socket, and the tube lights both just turned off on me. So let me see if I can get that work light back. I think it might be overheating. It's very close to a furnace vent. There we go. That's better. Jinxed myself. Okay, let's see if I can fix this. Everybody say a prayer. Okay. Okay, so I saved the cable that I messed up last time for last. I've got a group of 3 here. I've got 2 good cables on either side, and then the one messed up one is in the middle. There we go. So I'm going to be real careful here. I'm going to go in with my X-Acto knife actually and pre-slice a lot of this insulation so that hopefully I can avoid tearing out any more of that solid copper from the middle. I don't have a lot left to work with here. I've got from there to there. That's it. It should be plenty to get where I need to. This is not a big circuit board, but I don't want to take any chances. This music, man. It's a good thing this is free. Not really my style. Better than nothing, though. Okay, here we go. Moment of truth. Okay, that side was clean. Okay, saved myself. So we've got some nice, ugly wires everywhere. The next thing I think I'm going to do actually is glue the remaining flat part of this cable. I'm going to glue it in place on here with just some hot glue. Hot glue can get real messy, so I try not to use it for a lot of this. I do have a way I use it that I like, which is not using the gun at all, because the gun leads to all that stringy mess that everybody hates so much. So instead, I take the loose stick and I chop off some little pieces like that, and then I'll lay them on the board and actually heat them up with my soldering iron, and that lets me put it exactly where I want with no extra. But also the soldering iron gets a lot hotter than a hot glue gun, and that means the glue melts thinner, and because of that I find it sticks a little better, because it kind of, when it's thin, it can get into all the nooks and crannies and really adhere properly without having to just glob it on. We'll see if it works for me today or not. That lines up pretty well. It does get very warm under here. Switch up my fingers so I don't really burn. Okay, that looks good on that side. I'll do the opposite side. And then before I get started on anything else, actually, I'm going to put this back in the case and just make sure that this fits in the back edge of the case where I chop that out. And make sure everything's aligned up the way I need it to be. No sense working hard on something and then undoing most of it an hour later. wouldn't be a hot glue job if you didn't get some on your own finger, right? Ouch. Okay. Okay, that should let me work with this a little bit easier. I like that. And we'll coax all these loose wires to be mostly flat again. And we'll bring our case back over, slide it in, and that is exactly where I needed it to be. I don't think I can capture it on camera, but there's actually two little reinforcing bars inside the back of the Dreamcast here. Yeah, I don't have it lit very well. But they will kind of pinch the cable between the motherboard and the case. So I aimed to go right between them, and I actually lucked out and hit that perfectly. I only had some visual landmarks on the board. I didn't bother marking it out with a marker or anything. But we got away with that. So now, we pull up our schematic, and we get our pin counts and our wire counts, and we just start. I haven't decided on a good way to start this. In no particular order. So pin 1 and 2 are going to be on the left side of this connector. Looks like we got 5 wires out of 44 that aren't used. Everything else is. Could be worse though. So if our 1 and 2 is going to be on this side, farthest from the edge, 33, 34 is going to be back here. Or, sorry, I meant 43, 44. I'm shortchanging myself already. So a good number of these actually, from the higher numbers down, my higher numbered cables are on this edge here. So their higher numbers are out here, lower number cables are here, and for the most part the higher numbers seem to be on this side of the connector block, and they get lower as they go this way. So I'm thinking I can do run the high number wires in short, and then as we go we'll kind of have 90-degree sweeps from the outside of the cable and then down, and that might be able to keep it pretty tidy and flat. There are quite a few wires here that are just grounded. I'll pull up that list and maybe I can bend them out of the way in advance, and we'll hook them up last with a short jumper wire or something. What do we got? Conductor 2, 19, 22, 24, 26, 30, and 40 are all going to be grounded. This is somewhere that my tweezers will come in handy again. I did a stream of this before. My first mod I did to this guy is I put a dual BIOS on it. I've got a modified BIOS and the stock BIOS together, and I can select which one I want to boot from using my switch here. That lets me, if my CD-ROM drive for it, the GD-ROM, dies in the future, the modified BIOS will let me boot this thing with no disk drive attached at all. And normally it's always going to look for that disk drive, so that's the first part. What I'm doing today is hooking up a big old IDE ribbon cable so that I can use that new mod chip to boot this from a USB drive, or in my case I've got a little compact flash adapter. So I'm just kind of future-proofing things right now. If it all goes up in flames later, which these are prone to do because it's a laser drive, the diodes do die eventually, then I've got a way to keep on playing off a hard drive if I need it. So right now I'm dealing with a mess of wires, but hopefully by the end of the night this is tidy and soldered, and I can play it from a hard drive. That's the plan. Okay, that's connecting. So I'm suspecting now the conductors that are used for this cable aren't normal. I'll show you what I mean. It's supposed to be a 44-pin connector. I've been counting up to get to pin 19. Actually, I've got pin 22 here. Excuse me. Let me just get our pins ready. Okay, so this last wire here, this guy here, is supposedly 22. Okay, pin 22. I started counting from here. That's 22 wires. If I need 44 in the entire thing, and they're all the same size, I should be hitting 22 at the middle. It's way over here. So I think, just looking at the number of pins here too, when you see the number of little sockets there, and you compare to how tiny the wires are on this thing, it seems a little off. So I'm suspecting it's maybe not using every wire. Not every wire can be punched down. So what I'll do is a couple spot checks with my multimeter and check where the pins are mapping up. If the pin number, or if cable number 19 that I've counted out doesn't match pin number 19, then I've just made my job a lot longer. I think I still want to use this cable though, because it will lay very flat. The connectors are very thin. The conductors, I mean. So I may just try to persevere. But it's going to take ages now. I'm going to run these tweezers at 500. That seemed to actually strip the cable really clean without completely melting it. That's actually perfect. We'll try 500. Let's see if I get results like that every time. That'd be sweet. Okay, I think if I'm lucky, I've got pin 9 on the connector, pin 19, sorry. Let's see if these go. Oh, okay. Oh. Why would that be? Well, that's interesting. So this seems to be internally grounded somehow. I really have no idea how this connector is working on the cable. So like I said, I counted over 19 cables. I don't seem to be anywhere near the halfway point, but somehow it's grounding and matching the way we want it to. Let's double check my work. I'm going to take the one before it. We'll take number 18. Try the same test, because that's not supposed to be grounded. And we'll see if that matches up 1 to 1. I have a feeling I'm going to be individually testing every wire before I solder it, though. It's kind of a drag. Oh, 450. Okay. 450 cuts clean, too. A little trial and error here. That. So this should be wire 18. Flip this back over. Grab our tester. That should be 18. Everyone hoping for the magic beep. There we go. I don't actually know which one of these it should be. So. Kind of what I was afraid of. It's this one over here. What in the world? Okay. This is going to be a trick. It's not going to be easy. I don't see the problem with these IDE cables is I don't have a lot of them left either. They're kind of old school. Decision-making time. Do I strip the end of every cable here and test one by one to find the correct cable end before I solder them? And then slowly through process of elimination I get down to whatever's left. I really don't want to have to do that. This will make a much cleaner connection in the end too, because these are thinner gauge wire than the other IDE cables I've seen and used in the past. So if I can keep these to be the ones that actually connect to the pads, like they're the perfect size for that, this is just going to need a lot of work. Like a comb. Don't touch the pointy end. Thermal tweezers are making very short work of that. And just imagine how slow that would have gone with my old scissors or wire stripper method. They do gum up pretty quick though. But the alternative is far worse, so that works for me. There we go. Goes now. I think the way I'm going to tackle this once I get these all stripped is I'll find a ground pin and I'm just going to go through the whole group first. Find everything that's a ground and separate those off. Because I can tie those all together at the end. And then hopefully, from what I saw, there was a lot of extra ground pins that I tested. So maybe that will take up the majority of them. And then I won't have so many left to sift through. It does get kind of messy with all the melted insulation everywhere. Almost halfway. Yeah, a little over half actually. Just occurred to me, once I've got a good ground wire I know of, I don't have to test between the point on the cable's connector anymore. I can just hold the known ground wire in one hand and test off of that. Should make it a lot less fiddly. Gotta work smarter, not harder, right? Gotta try not to rush too much either. I'm totally gonna burn my finger. Just occurred to me, if I'm lucky, that cable that I butchered before will be a ground or something unused. It won't even matter that I tore it up like that. Okay, finally, got a bare end on each cable. This is brutal. So, like I said before, my plan is going to be find one known ground, and then I can flip the board over and just test every wire to find all the grounds, group those together, and hopefully that's got a lot of them sorted. What sucks is it took me that long just to strip all of these wires on the very ends here. When these are all soldered in place, I have to chop and strip these again for much shorter lengths. So this is not going to be a small task, unfortunately. So I'll grab my I/O schematic and pin 2 is a ground. Okay, we got one. sure that's still the ground and that I didn't mix this up somehow. Yep. 40 was also supposed to be the ground. Okay, good. That's for sure ground. So I'll flip this guy right up here. Okay, and I wasn't lucky enough that my damaged wire was the ground also, and I didn't have to care about it. Okay, 3 cables on the end are all grounds in a row. Still don't know how these are going to be mapped out. That's more, it's probably half as many grounds as I saw listed on my pinouts, which, if this continues, means most of the extra cables that shouldn't be in this ribbon are all going to be grounds. I can just join them together, and the number of cables I have left to test over at the end and figure out which is which will be pretty small. Okay. Here's our first one that isn't a ground. Pulling anything I've identified as a ground is coming straight towards me, and anything that is something else is going off to the side. I'll try and keep them relatively in order. Okay, I may be getting lucky here. And having all of the extra pins be ground. Another unknown. I'm also hoping I see a pattern of ground pin, which looks like it's starting right now. And maybe that would just mean there's twice as many conductors as pins on the actual connector, and then I can go back to counting like a normal person. I'm doing it this way. And now some connectors or some conductors on the actual final connector are ground also. So there will be parts that skip that pattern. But I think I've already jinxed myself. Yeah, that's not. Oh no, I'm wrong. The pattern continues. separator here too, just to maybe stop me from mixing myself up. I'm going to kill for some alligator clamps, just to hold some of these for me. Okay, so that pattern of connector, wire, or connector, ground is still repeating. Actually, I might have an alligator clip with me. Yes. Lucky. Okay, let's save some time. Not a lot, but it's something. So here's what we do. We'll take an alligator clip on one lead. I'll group a bunch of these grounds together actually, just to keep things even tighter. And now, yeah, that's what we want. Now I don't have to hold two wires every time. I just grab wires off the stack, touch them, and we know. Ground. Another ground. This is riveting stuff. Let me tell you what. Not a ground. I think that's one of those pins I had mentioned earlier that's actually just supposed to be ground in the final connector, which is why we heard 3 in a row there. Yep. Okay. That should be ground again, back on the pattern. Okay, good. I'm not going to take any shortcuts here and just assume the rest of these follow the same pattern. I'll map them all out first and then do a count. And we'll see if it is literally every other cable being our signal and every other one being a ground. Thinking I might not finish this project tonight. Once I'm done with all this tedious stuff, I may call it and go play some games. It's foolish of me pushing off the things like that. I could have mixed it up with my other wires. I'm trying to get ahead of myself here. I'm gonna slow down. Yes, sir, I am doing an HDD mod. I currently, my GD-ROM still works right now, but I don't want to risk it. I know it's going to die someday, so I want to back up. So I'm preparing it to be able to boot off of, actually I'm going to use a compact flash adapter that runs off IDE. I already did a piggybacked BIOS mod, and that's working, and it loads Dream Shell right off the chip. So theoretically, I've got everything I need now to boot right off of a hard drive or compact flash card. I kind of screwed this up though. I've got a ribbon cable that's got twice as many conductors as I need. So I'm combing through them all and finding all the grounds, and then I'll know what to ignore. Every time I hear a beep, I found another ground. I have not done a VGA mod actually. I don't really have a good setup to play on VGA. I kind of do all my retro stuff on an old CRT monitor. I don't think there's many mods or many wires needed. Can't you actually use a breakout box and do your VGA mod outside without having to do any extra soldering internally? I think I've read that somewhere. Okay, cool. I might go that route then. I have seen pretty cheap VGA cables out there, so if I need to, I'll consider that maybe. I want to try and avoid hacking up the case as much as I can. I like to keep things looking pretty stock. So my compact flash adapter should be able to fit inside the case when I'm all done, and you really won't be able to tell. One thing I've seen is guys are doing these Pico power supplies inside. So you have like a 12-volt power brick that will sit outside the console instead. And then inside you have another little tiny power supply that barely puts out any heat. And that seems kind of appealing. Oh yeah, you too? So do you have a VGA mod on yours? Doesn't seem to be a lot of people that are doing this that I've run into, so it's cool to see someone else who knows a bit about this stuff. Oh, okay, cool. I'm blown away by the fact that that power supply mod is supposed to cool the console off by so much. Apparently, like 90% of the heat in these things comes out of the power supply, and it's not even from your graphics chip or processor or whatever else you would expect it to come from. It's all the power supply. I don't know how they made them so efficient. is brutal. So definitely if Adam Korlick, yeah, I have watched him. What's his thing? Figure It Out. Figure It Out Productions. Yeah, his Keep Dreaming series is pretty cool. That was where I first learned about, actually where I first learned about the Compact Flash mod idea. And then that kind of sent me down the rabbit hole. It's got some good stuff. He kind of turned me on to RGB modding a lot of my consoles too, actually. I know he's a Dreamcast fan through and through. How did this get more fiddly when I have less wires left? Don't get it. We're in the home stretch. Should be ground, I think. Oh, it threw me for a loop. Okay, that is actually pin 1. That was an ordeal. I'll grab the proper cable. Okay, so a little pro tip for anyone who may watch this in the future and wants to do the same thing. This is the cable I'm using. Focus. So you can see those are nice tiny flat wires, look really good. Here's the same size IDE cable from a different manufacturer. Look how much bigger those wires are. That's because this one's got extra conductors in it. There's twice as many wires as you actually need. So every wire in between is actually a ground. Which means when your mod guides are telling you wire up pin 19 to ground and you count over 19 pins, you're nowhere near the right wire. So I just stripped back every single one of them. Tested for all the grounds. All of these over here are grounds. These are all not ground. I don't know if they're all the right signals or not. I'm going to count them up and make sure we have the right number now. But it's good to have that confirmed. These will solder up a lot nicer to the tiny little pads that I'm looking at, but I don't know if it's worth that headache just for a slightly cleaner mod inside. That was a real pain. Okay, those numbers check out. Hey, cool, man. Thanks for the follow. Really appreciate that. I'm gonna do these occasionally. I play games a lot with my friends, but I'm trying to set up a more permanent thing for this. So yeah, thanks for dropping by, man. I think I'm calling it a night too, actually. My back is hurting after all of this. I'm gonna go play some PUBG and unwind, because this took a turn for the worse. But I'll follow this up with a part 2 and actually get this mod finished, now that all the preliminary work is done. There's the end result after tonight. Absolute spaghetti rat's nest. But these are all ground wires. They can be joined, bridged together, and soldered all at the end. And then this is what I actually have to connect, which it looks a lot more manageable now. So they get soldered onto this little group of pads here, and then we all cross our fingers and toes and hope that we can boot. Okay, thanks everyone for stopping by. Hope we all have a great night.